Episode 3. So I'm opening with a few history reference images that I often play to remind myself what this whole venture is about. In this episode we deal with a first go at the internal structure. The first minute of this episode is a bit static due to the lack of video, but it does get better. Having completed the basics of the exterior hull, we're back inside with another scrape and sand of the diagonal planks. And then I needed to address the planking joints, which varied in width from 1mm to 10mm. Firstly, I poured in liquid epoxy into every joint to try and get it to saturate between the two layers of original planking to make sure there were no voids. After that, I added some thickened epoxy to bridge the gaps. While doing this, I found a few more gravos were required. Then yet another sand, which was difficult due to the amount of rows and nails still showing. Finally, I was ready for a first coat of primer, and this is where I made my first mistake by using a 2-pack primer. 2-pack is just too hard to sand, especially when you're working around protruding nails and rows. Clearly, I was going to have another go at this, as the finish was just not good enough. But I wanted to move on and get the floors happening. First, I temporarily put back the remains of the original floor stringer to know where the top of the floor should be. This line is level and parallel to the waterline. So here's another mea culpa. I discovered that I hadn't taken any video of the floor making process. So here's a brief description. I shaped a thin plywood template where I wanted to place every new floor, then used that to give an outline for a jig on which I clamped laminated strips of flooded gum with solid blocks below. I then applied thickened epoxy to the strips, applied lots of clamps, and left the floor to cure overnight. Once cleaned up, each floor was carefully scribed in and fitted. With all the floors completed, I then trimmed them down to the stringer line and temporarily fastened them with coach bolts. I then shaped and fitted the new floor stringers, but not yet fastened. I then primed everything and refastened the floors, but now with Sikaflex adhesive. It was now time to replace the temporary coach bolts with custom-made copper bolts. I added washers, Sikaflex and caulking. Pity I haven't learnt to frame a camera properly. However, you can see the temporary coach bolts that are holding the floors in place. Next came the tricky part of holding the bolts in place without having an assistant holding a dolly. No, not that kind of dolly. This kind of dolly. With much trial and error, I found that using a post with a steel washer fixed to the top and with a series of blocks and wedges, I managed to keep the bolts firmly in place. I can say that it was very frustrating when, having climbed back into the boat, the prop would collapse at the very first hit of the peening hammer. But them's the breaks when you're a solo player. It took all sorts of methods and ingenuity to hold these props in place. So once back in the boat, I cut off the surplus copper, put a washer on and started peening. It takes a little more than one thinks to peen a 3/8 copper rod down, despite them having been annealed. That's 6 bolts per floor, 9 floors, 54 heads to be made. When I thought the timber was vulnerable, I would use a protective guard such as this. With the floors completed, I went on to add the 3 mast step floors that were complete copies of the originals. Another sand and another coat of primer, single pack this time. These were followed by a new mast step, which did not mimic the original, as that had found to be inadequate. This pretty much wraps up this episode of manufacture and installation of the floors. I'm going to leave you with a couple of images of Roaini, which is a near sister ship to Petrel. Roaini is still pretty much original and sailing on Auckland Harbour with the Tino Rawa Trust.